In a quiet American town wrapped in Christmas lights, four broken lives cross paths after years of silence. Emma, a grieving mother, Lucas, a lonely firefighter, Sarah, a foster teen searching for belonging, and Michael, a soldier returning home wounded in ways no one can see. As a winter storm traps them together on Christmas Eve, hidden memories, painful truths, and unexpected miracles force them to confront their past and rediscover the meaning of love, family, and forgiveness. The first snowfall of December drifted down over Willow Creek, the small American town that looked as if it had been carved from a Christmas postcard. Houses were lined with wreaths, windows glowed warm gold, and the streets carried the soft hush of winter. Yet for Emma Carter, the beauty of the season felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. Emma's hands trembled as she locked the front door of her house. She still lived in the same white cottage with the blue shutters, the one she and her son Noah had painted together 5 years ago. Noah had insisted on blue because it was the color of superheroes, and she had laughed then, never imagining how precious that memory would someday become. This Christmas would be the third one without him. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, trying to block the cold and the ache that always returned with December. Every wreath she saw, every carol she heard, every sight of children running through snow, everything dragged her back to the day she wished she could rewrite forever. She walked across Maple Street toward the cafe where she worked part-time. The owner, Mrs. Alden, always placed a cup of cinnamon hot chocolate on the counter for her, every morning. "You need sweet things," she always said. "Your heart has carried enough bitterness for a lifetime." Emma appreciated the kindness, though she didn't know how to explain that sweetness no longer reached the parts of her heart that were shattered. As she reached the cafe, she saw someone standing outside. A tall man, shoulders broad, postured tense as though he carried a weight even the cold wind couldn't move. Snow coated his dark jacket, and he didn't seem to notice. He stared through the window at the glowing interior, the lights reflecting in eyes that were a little too tired for someone who looked so young. Emma recognized him. Everyone in town did. Lucas Hayes, the firefighter who had saved countless lives, but not the one that mattered most to her. Her heart kicked painfully in her chest. She fought the instinct to turn around and walk away. Lucas had never approached her, never spoken more than a stiff greeting, but every time she saw him, she felt the same mixture of gratitude and guilt and grief. She wondered if he felt it too. Lucas noticed her before she could slip inside. He straightened, snow falling from his jacket in soft clumps. "Emma," he said in a low voice, breath fogging into the cold. "Morning." She forced a nod. "Morning, Lucas." An awkward silence settled between them, held up by memories neither dared to touch. Lucas cleared his throat. "I wanted to ask you something. Are you doing okay? I know December is hard." She stiffened. "People ask me that all the time, neighbors, customers, well-meaning strangers. But from Lucas, it felt different, heavy, dangerous." "I'm fine," she lied softly. "I manage." He nodded but didn't look convinced. His gaze drifted toward the snow-covered street. "Storm's coming. Radio says it'll hit tonight. You got everything you need?" Her chest tightened. Even after all these years, he still worried. Or maybe he felt obligated. She didn't know which one hurt more. She said, "I'll be okay. Thank you." Lucas opened his mouth as if to speak again, but a voice called from across the street. "Hey, Lucas!" It was Captain Ross from the fire station. Lucas lifted a hand in acknowledgement, then glanced back at Emma, expression conflicted. "Stay warm," he murmured, before walking away. Emma exhaled slowly, her breath shaky. She stepped inside the cafe, the warmth enveloping her instantly. Mrs. Alden greeted her with a soft smile, placing the usual cup of hot chocolate on the counter. "Storm tonight," she said. "Town might go quiet for a day or two." Emma nodded, removing her gloves, but she couldn't stop thinking about Lucas standing alone in the snow, looking as lost as she felt. As she tied her apron, she glanced toward the window. Across the street, Lucas walked briskly toward the station, his figure fading into the heavy curtain of falling flakes. A storm was coming, and Emma had no idea that it would bring with it the people, the memories, and the miracles that would change everything. Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cold bus window as Willow Creek appeared in the distance, wrapped in snow like a silent, sleeping world. The bus engine growled beneath her, rattling with every turn, but she didn't mind the noise. Noise meant distraction. Distraction meant she didn't have to think. 17 years old, and already tired of starting over. Her duffel bag sat beside her, everything she owned stuffed into one frame canvas sack, a cracked phone, 2 pairs of jeans, a sweatshirt she'd stolen from a lost and found bin, and a tiny snow globe shaped like a Christmas tree, the only thing she had from her mother. When Sarah shook it, glitters swirled like a tiny storm trapped in glass, and she used to pretend that inside it lived a safer world, one where people stayed and homes didn't disappear overnight. But she didn't shake the snow globe anymore. This was her 6th foster placement in 2 years. The last one had lasted barely 3 months before the family didn't feel the connection. Sarah didn't blame them. People didn't connect with her. They kept her for a while, fed her, smiled at her, then sent her back like a package delivered to the wrong address. The bus slowed as it turned into Willow Creek Station. Snowflakes clung to the windows, forming soft white webs. Sarah hugged her coat tighter. The zipper was broken, but she held it shut with her fist. The driver called, "End of the line!" Sarah stood, slinging the duffel over her shoulder. As she stepped off the bus, a sharp gust of icy wind slapped her face, making her eyes water. The station platform was small, with a single bench and a flickering lamp that hummed in the cold. A woman stood beneath the light, tall, wearing a red wool coat, holding a clipboard. Great, the social worker. "Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked with a tight professional smile. "Yeah," Sarah muttered. "I'm Karen Lewis. Welcome to Willow Creek." She spoke kindly, but her eyes held that familiar, practiced sympathy, the kind adults always used when they didn't know what to do with her. Karen motioned to her car. "Your foster placement is waiting for you. They're a bit older, but very nice. Empty nesters who volunteer at the church. They've hosted teens before." Sarah nodded. It didn't matter who they were. She'd play along, be polite, follow the rules, and wait for the day they decided they didn't want her anymore. It always came. They drove through the town in silence. Willow Creek was beautiful in a way that almost annoyed her. Everything clean, everything peaceful, everything glowing with Christmas lights, like a town pretending nothing bad had ever happened. As they passed the fire station, Sarah glanced out the window. A group of firefighters stood outside, brushing snow off the engine. One of them, tall, dark jacket, broad shoulders, looked familiar, though she didn't know why. Maybe she'd seen him on a news clip somewhere? He looked up. Their eyes didn't meet exactly, but Sarah had the strange sense he wasn't looking at his team. He was looking at something far away inside himself. She knew that look. It was the expression of someone carrying ghosts. Karen's car turned onto a quieter street lined with small homes, each one decorated with lights or wreaths or red ribbons. But the house they stopped at stood dark. No lights, no wreath, nothing but a porch buried in unshoveled snow. Sarah frowned. "They live here?" Karen sighed. They were supposed to leave the porch light on. Maybe they forgot. But she could tell the unease in her voice wasn't about a forgotten light. Karen knocked on the door. Silence. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. "Mr. and Mrs. Rayland? We're here with Sarah." Nothing. Sarah shoved her hands deeper into her sleeves. "It's fine. They changed their minds. It happens." No, Karen insisted, but her voice trembled. She tried the doorknob. Locked. After 5 long minutes, she stepped off the porch, exhaling sharply. "I'm going to call the agency. This shouldn't happen." Sarah didn't say anything. It wasn't new. But the cold was growing sharper and the snow coming down heavier. Karen motioned toward her car. "We'll figure something out, okay?" As they turned back, Sarah noticed a house across the street, Small, warm lights glowing inside, the windows soft and golden. A woman stood in the doorway for a moment, tying a scarf around her neck before stepping into the snow. She looked sad, beautiful but sad. Sarah didn't know why she couldn't look away. The woman didn't notice them, but something about her felt quiet, familiar in a way she couldn't understand. Before she could keep staring, her phone buzzed, the cracked screen lighting up with a number she didn't recognize. Her heartbeat hitched. For a second, just 1 second, she hoped. Maybe her mother, maybe someone who remembered she existed. She answered. A robotic voice spoke. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. The call ended. Sarah swallowed hard, blinking quickly so the tears wouldn't fall. Karen was still arguing with someone on her phone. No, you don't understand. We can't send her back tonight. There's a storm coming. Sarah closed her eyes. Of course there was. A storm outside, and the same one she'd carried inside for years. She didn't know it yet, but this storm would lead her to Emma, to Lucas, and to a Christmas that would change her life forever.
Michael Walker had rehearsed this moment, coming home, for months. In the hospital bed overseas, during the flight back to the States, even walking through the airport where people clapped for him, thanked him for his service, handed him small flags he didn't know what to do with. But nothing had prepared him for the silence of the long highway stretching into Willow Creek. Home. A word he used to love. Now it felt too heavy to speak. Michael sat in the back of the military transport van, winter light reflecting off the thick brace around his knee. Every bump in the road sent a dull ache up his leg, but physical pain was familiar, manageable. It was the other pain, the one he couldn't point to, touch, explain, that made his chest tighten with every passing mile. He had changed. He knew that much. But Willow Creek? He didn't know if it had stayed the same or if it had moved on without him. Almost there, the driver said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror with soft concern. Weather's turning bad. Storm's supposed to hit in a few hours. You sure you don't want us to drop you at the VA housing in Hampshire instead? I'm sure, he replied quietly. He didn't want a stranger's room, a stranger's bed, a stranger's hallway echoing with other people's pain. He wanted home, or at least what used to be home. The driver nodded and focused back on the road. Michael looked out the window. Snowflakes drifted like dust, shaken off the sky. The world outside blurred into a ribbon of white fields, barns, mailboxes, and trees bending under the weight of winter. When they passed the Willow Creek fire station, Michael's heart gave a painful, uneven thud. Lucas Hayes. He hadn't seen his best friend in nearly 2 years. Lucas had written him letters, long ones at first, then shorter, then sporadic. Michael never blamed him. Life didn't stop just because someone else went to war, and Michael had stopped answering toward the end. It was easier to withdraw than to explain what he was becoming. As the van slowed at a red light, Michael saw firefighters outside shoveling snow, and then there he was. Lucas. Same broad shoulders, same steady way he moved, same seriousness in his face. But something was different. A heaviness in his posture. A grief Michael recognized instantly. Michael leaned closer to the window, breath fogging the glass. For a moment he thought Lucas might look up, sense him, feel him nearby, like old friends sometimes do. But Lucas didn't. He just kept working, lost in his own world. Michael swallowed and sat back. The van continued through town until it turned down Cedar Lane. His mother's house, white with a gray porch, came into view buried under snow. Warm lights glowed through the windows. But no figure appeared on the porch. No silhouette in the doorway. No one waiting. The driver parked and helped Michael carry his bag to the walkway. "You got someone inside expecting you?" he asked gently. "Yeah, my mom." He didn't say the rest. She didn't know he was coming tonight. He hadn't been ready to call her. He wasn't sure he'd be ready even tomorrow. As the van drove away, Michael stood alone on the icy path, gripping the railing for balance. The house seemed to watch him, waiting to see what version of him had returned. He took a breath and knocked on the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps rushed from inside. The door swung open. "Michael!" her mother gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes instantly. She looked older, more silver strands in her hair, deeper lines around her mouth. But her eyes were exactly the same. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. She threw her arms around him, careful of his injuries but clinging to him as if letting go would make him disappear. "My baby, my boy, you're home, you're finally home," she cried. He hugged her back, eyes burning, throat tightening. He didn't trust himself to speak. She pulled back and cupped his face. "Come inside, sweetheart. Oh God, you must be freezing." He stepped into the warmth of the house. The smell of cinnamon filled the air. His mother always baked when she was anxious. A small Christmas tree glowed in the corner, decorated with ornaments from his childhood. Home. And yet, not quite. His mother fussed around him, taking his coat, touching his arm, adjusting the pillows on the couch. "You should sit. I'll make tea, or cocoa, or soup. Do you want soup?" "Mom," he said softly, "I'm okay. Sit with me?" She nodded quickly, blinking tears away. She sat across from him, hands trembling. "I didn't know you were coming tonight. You said after New Year's." "I changed my mind." She studied him, and he knew she could see it. The shadows behind his eyes, the exhaustion written into his bones, the pieces of him that were missing. "Michael, are you all right?" she asked gently. A question simple in words, impossible in truth. He looked at the glowing Christmas tree. He looked at his mother's hopeful eyes. He looked at the snow falling outside like a world trying to bury its own memories. And for the first time since coming home, his voice cracked as he whispered, "I don't know." He didn't know that somewhere across town, a grieving woman and a lost foster girl were facing storms of their own. He didn't know that soon, fate would pull all four of them together in ways none of them could imagine. 3 hearts broken, 1 heart returning, all heading toward a Christmas that would change everything.
Emma finished wiping down the last table as the cafe's closed sign clinked softly against the glass door. Outside, snow fell harder now, the sky dimming into a deep blue that warned of the storm rolling in. The streets were emptier than usual, people rushing home, eager to tuck themselves safely behind warm curtains and crackling fireplaces. Except Emma. Home wasn't warmth to her. Home was memory. And memory was a wound she wasn't ready to reopen. "Be safe going back," Mrs. Alden said as she pulled on her coat. "Storm like this can trap you faster than you expect." Emma nodded, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere, towards the strange uneasiness that had tugged at her since morning. Maybe it was seeing Lucas. Maybe it was the cold of December or the ache settling deeper each passing year. Or maybe it was the quiet sense that something in the town had shifted, even if she couldn't name what. She stepped outside, her breath turning to clouds in the frosty air. Cinnamon, snow, and wood smoke mingled in the breeze. She wrapped her coat tighter and started down the street. Halfway home, something made her stop. Across from the cafe, near the bus station, she spotted movement. A girl, thin, wrapped in a broken coat that barely held together. A woman beside her argued frantically on the phone, pacing in the snow. The girl stood still, duffel bag at her feet, staring at the ground as if she'd been dropped in the wrong universe. A child. Alone. In the storm. Emma's heart pinched sharply. For a moment she froze. A familiar fear whispered inside her. "Don't get involved. You can't handle more loss. Keep your distance." But another voice, Something quieter and older nudged her forward. She took a step toward them, then stopped. The social worker hung up, hurried Sarah back into the car, and drove away before Emma reached them. Gone. Just like that. Emma exhaled, chest tight for reasons she didn't fully understand. The girl's face stuck with her. Tired, wary, heartbreakingly familiar. She reminded Emma of herself at 17. Lost, unheld, pretending the cold didn't hurt. Emma blinked away the thought and kept walking. When she reached her street, a sudden wind whipped snow into her face. She ducked her head and hurried toward her house, the white cottage with blue shutters. The same shutters Noah had painted, the same house frozen in time, like it was waiting for something that would never return. Emma unlocked the door and stepped inside. Warmth didn't greet her. Silence did. She hung up her coat, her fingers brushing the small framed drawing Noah had made, a stick figure family holding hands under a crooked Christmas tree. She touched his name scribbled at the bottom. Noah, age 5. Her eyes burned, but she blinked hard and turned away. She moved into the living room, switching on the lamp. The soft golden glow filled the space, reflecting off the ornaments of a tree she hadn't decorated in 2 years. Last Christmas, she'd tried. She'd opened the box, touched the garland, held one tiny ornament shaped like a snowman. Then she'd close the box again, because Christmas wasn't Christmas without laughter, without messy ornaments placed too low on branches, without a small voice asking if Santa could bring their cat a present too. Emma sank onto the couch, exhaustion seeping into her bones. Outside, the wind howled. The storm was close now, rattling the windows. She reached for the remote when a knock. Soft, uncertain, almost frightened. Emma stilled. No one visited her anymore. Another knock, sharper this time, carrying urgency. She stood slowly and moved to the door. Her hand hesitated on the knob. Something fluttered in her chest, a warning or an intuition she couldn't tell. She opened the door, snow swirled in, wind pushed against her, and there, on her porch, stood the girl from earlier. Sarah. Thin, shivering, eyes red from cold and something deeper. Her duffel bag lay at her feet, half buried in snow. Behind her, the storm raged. Beside her, no adult was in sight. Her voice trembled as she whispered, I didn't know where else to go. Emma stopped. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't understand how fate had placed this child at her door. A child who looked like she knew exactly what loss felt like. "Sweetheart," Emma said softly, "what happened?" Sarah swallowed. Snow clung to her lashes. "My placement, they weren't there. The worker said she'd come back, but the storm got worse, and..." Her lips trembled. "I was scared." The wind roared behind her, pushing her forward, as if begging Emma to decide. Emma stared at the girl, at her shaking shoulders, at the loneliness in her eyes, at the small snow globe peeking from her coat pocket. Something inside Emma cracked, the same part of her that had been frozen since Noah died, the same part she believed would never feel anything again. Without thinking, without planning, without fear, Emma reached out her hand. "Come inside." Sarah blinked. "Are you sure?" Emma nodded slowly. No one should face a storm alone. As Sarah stepped inside, Emma didn't realize that this moment, this single fragile choice, would become the turning point of everything. For her, for Sarah, for Lucas, for Michael. 4 broken hearts, one home, one storm, and a Christmas that had only just begun to reveal its miracles.
The fire station smelled of smoke, old coffee, and damp winter jackets. The scent of a place that had seen too many long nights and carried too many unspoken stories.
Lucas Hayes tossed a shovel against the wall and brushed snow off his sleeves. His breath still fogged from the cold outside, but the sweat at the back of his neck came from something deeper, something that had gnawed at him ever since he'd seen Emma that morning. He shouldn't have stopped her, shouldn't have asked if she was okay, shouldn't have crossed that invisible line they both tiptoed around. But he had, because he cared, more than he should. "Hayes," Captain Ross called from the office doorway. "Storm's pushing harder than expected. We're on standby tonight. I want you rested." Lucas nodded, though rest felt impossible. His mind spun like a loose wheel, images of Emma in the falling snow, the haunted look in her eyes, the soft tremble in her voice. It had been 3 years. But grief didn't follow calendars. And for Lucas, guilt didn't either. He moved toward the lockers, pulling off his gloves. Kyle, one of the younger firefighters, leaned against a bench, scrolling on his phone. "Man, this storm is wild," Kyle said. "My girlfriend's already texting me like the world's ending. You think we'll get called out tonight?" Lucas shrugged. Storm nights always bring something. House fires, power outages, people trapped on the road. Just be ready. Kyle smirked. "You sound like my dad." Lucas didn't respond. He wasn't in the mood for banter. He opened his locker and stared at the small photograph taped inside, one he kept hidden behind his helmet. A picture of Noah, smiling, wearing a plastic firefighter hat Lucas had given him for his 5th birthday. Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. He remembered that day. He remembered every minute with Noah. And he remembered the day he lost him. The day Lucas couldn't get there in time. Footsteps approached, pulling him from the memory. "Hayes." Lucas looked up to see Henry, an older firefighter with graying hair and the calm presence of a man who'd seen more fires than anyone should. "You all right?" Henry asked quietly. Lucas closed his locker. "Yeah, fine." Henry gave him a long, knowing look. "Saw you talking to Emma Carter this morning." Lucas tensed. "Yeah?" "She looked fragile. She always does around this time of year," Lucas murmured. "And you?" Henry asked. "How are you around this time of year?" Lucas looked away. "It's not about me, Henry. Maybe it should be." Lucas shook his head. "Not tonight. I don't want to talk about it." Henry laid a hand on his shoulder. "Storms shake loose more than snow, kid. They shake loose the things we keep buried." Before Lucas could reply, the station alarm blared, a piercing wail slicing through the air. Kyle straightened instantly. "Call?" Captain Ross rushed out of the office, grabbing his radio. "Small cabin fire on Ridgepine Road. Family evacuated, flames spreading fast with the wind." Lucas grabbed his gear, strapping on his jacket, helmet, and oxygen pack with quick, practiced movements. His heartbeat pounded, not from fear, but from the surge of focus that came every time the alarm rang. Saving lives was the one thing that made sense to him, the one thing that gave him purpose after everything else had shattered. The team raced to the fire engine. As Lucas climbed in, the radio crackled with frantic voices. "Fire's growing, winds throwing embers up the hill, visibility dropping." Captain Ross turned to the team. "Storm's hitting its peak. Roads, I'll be ice soon. Stay sharp." The engine roared out of the station, lights blazing against the white night. Snow whipped across the windshield, blurring the world into streaks of light and shadow. Lucas steadied himself, bracing against the seat. Something felt different tonight. A pull in the air, a sense that the storm wasn't just weather. It was a crossroads. As they sped through town, passing the glowing cottage on Maple Street, Lucas's gaze caught the outline of Emma's house. A light was on, but something else, a shadow, moved inside the window. Someone was with her. Lucas's stomach tightened. He didn't know who. He didn't know why he cared. but the sight hit him harder than the cold air ripping through the cracks of the engine. Kyle noticed Lucas staring. "Everything okay?" Lucas forced his eyes forward. "Yeah, focus on the fire." But his heart hammered in a way fires never caused, because Emma wasn't alone tonight, and he didn't know what that meant. Not yet, but he would. Very soon. Minutes later, the engine screeched to a stop in front of a cabin swallowed in orange flames. Heat blasted against the icy air, sending sparks spiraling upward like frantic fireflies. Captain Ross shouted orders. "Hayes, Kyle, go in from the left, check for pets or secondary victims. Storm's pushing flames towards the ridge." Lucas grabbed the hose with Kyle and ran through the thick smoke. A burning tree cracked behind them, collapsing as the wind howled like something alive. "Move!" Lucas yelled. They dodged the falling branch, snow exploding around them from the impact. Inside the cabin, smoke swallowed everything. Lucas's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing charred walls and overturned furniture. "No movement," Kyle called. "Place looks abandoned." "Keep checking," Lucas yelled. Each second in the smoke was a battle, against heat, against fear, against memories. Noah's hand slipping from his. Emma screaming his name. Sirens that came too late. Lucas's breath hitched. Focus. Stay focused. He pushed deeper into the burning room when suddenly, a muffled sound. Not human. A whimper. "Here!" Lucas shouted. He swung his light toward a small overturned table. Beneath it, a trembling golden retriever, eyes wide with terror. "Got you," Lucas murmured. He lifted the dog into his arms just as a beam above them groaned, a split-second warning before it crashed downward. Kyle grabbed Lucas's jacket, yanking him back as the beam slammed into the floor where Lucas had stood. "Hayes, you good?" Kyle gasped. Lucas nodded, clutching the dog to his chest. "Let's get out." They burst out of the cabin seconds before the roof gave way behind them. As they returned the dog to its crying owners, Lucas finally exhaled. Relief washed through him, but the tightness in his chest didn't ease. Because while he'd saved a life tonight, the storm inside him still raged. And somewhere across town, inside a warm, glowing cottage, Emma had opened her door to someone. Someone he didn't know. Someone who wasn't him. He didn't understand why that mattered so much. Not yet. But he would. Very soon. The morning after the town's candlelight vigil, Emily Carter woke with a heaviness in her chest she couldn't shake. The winter sun filtered weakly through her window, turning the frost on the glass into tiny, trembling stars. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, listening to the quiet breathing of the house. Christmas was only 10 days away, yet it felt impossibly distant, like a holiday meant for other people, not for families missing someone. Downstairs, the faint sound of the kettle whistling drifted up. Emily knew it was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had stepped in almost like a grandmother since Emily arrived in the U.S. The house wasn't hers. She was staying with Mrs. Thompson until things stabilized, and nothing felt stable. As she walked down the wooden steps, she noticed the photo still hanging on the wall. Michael Carter, her older brother, smiling in his Marine uniform. The same smile he wore the day he left home for the base. She stopped on the staircase and pressed her fingers gently against his face in the picture. Mrs. Thompson glanced over from the kitchen. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," Emily whispered. The old woman poured hot cocoa into a red mug decorated with snowflakes and set it in front of her. Emily wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat settle her trembling fingers. Silence filled the kitchen, a kind of silence that only happens when two people are trying not to break. Finally, Mrs. Thompson spoke. "I thought I'd go with you today, to the base, if you want company." Emily's throat tightened. Today was the day she would receive the official letter, the one that confirmed what her mind already knew, but her heart refused to accept. The letter that told her whether her brother was among the missing or the fallen. She nodded weakly. Later that afternoon, the sky began to gray as they drove toward the military facility. Snowflakes drifted down in slow, hesitant spirals, like the sky itself didn't want to touch the earth. She kept her eyes out the window, watching them fall. When they arrived, she recognized Captain Ross, a tall, steady man with tired eyes, waiting near the entrance. He offered a respectful nod. "Emily, Mrs. Thompson, please, come inside." The air in the office was heavy, heavy with loss, heavy with the weight of news families carried out of these doors. Captain Ross held an envelope in his hand, sealed with Marine Corps insignia. Emily stared at it, her heart beat loud in her ears. She swallowed. "That's it, isn't it?" He hesitated. "Yes." Her hands trembled as she reached out, but she couldn't close her fingers around the paper. Instead, she let her arms fall to her sides. "I can't open it," she whispered. "Not yet." Mrs. Thompson gently squeezed her shoulder. "You can wait. There's no rule that says you must do it today." Captain Ross nodded with understanding. "Take your time. You're not alone in this." As they turned to leave, he called softly after them. "And Emily, whatever's inside that envelope, your brother is a hero. Remember that." Outside, the snowfall had grown heavier, blanketing the world in white. Emily stepped into it, closed her eyes, and let the cold flakes melt on her cheeks. She wasn't sure if she was crying or if it was just the snow. They walked toward the car, but Emily paused. Across the street, families were decorating the town's Christmas tree. Children laughing, parents stringing lights, a choir practicing carols. The warmth of the scene pressed painfully against her heart. Mrs. Thompson noticed and asked gently, "Would you like to help them? Maybe it will take your mind off things." Emily shook her head. "Not yet. Christmas doesn't feel like Christmas without Michael." Her voice cracked at his name. As they drove home, the unopened envelope lay on her lap. Each mile felt heavier, as if the car dragged the weight of her grief behind it. Snow covered the windshield, the world turning blurry and soft. That night, Emily sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. She held the envelope in her hands, staring at the name printed on it, Corporal Michael Carter. But she didn't open it. Instead, she whispered into the cold December air, "Where are you, Michael? Please, please come home." The snow kept falling silent and endless, as if the sky itself was holding its breath.
The wind had grown relentless by evening, whipping through the streets of Willow Creek and draping the town in thick, swirling snow. Lights from houses flickered like distant stars, half hidden by the heavy curtain of white. The storm was no longer a gentle hush. It was a living thing, pressing in on every street and alley. Inside her small, cozy cottage, Emma Carter paced near the window. The girl she had taken in earlier that day, Sarah, sat on the couch with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. Emma had wrapped her in a thick blanket, but the tremor in Sarah's body wasn't just from the cold. It was the trembling of fear, distrust, and loneliness that she had carried for years. Emma knelt beside her. "You're safe here," she said softly. Sarah looked up at her with wide, wary eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't have anywhere else to go." "I know, but for tonight, this is your home." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. The storm was growing heavier than anyone had anticipated. The radio crackled faintly from the kitchen counter. News of accidents, power outages, and stranded drivers filled the air. Emma's stomach tightened with unease. She had thought she was ready for another long, quiet night alone, but now she realized she wasn't.
Not with Sarah there, not with the storm outside. A sudden knock at the door startled them both. Emma froze. "Who?" she started, moving cautiously toward the door. Another knock, louder this time, shook the frame. "Emma, please, open up!" Emma's heart leapt. The voice was unmistakable. Lucas Hayes. She opened the door to find him standing in the snow, shoulders dusted with flakes, eyes wide and concerned. The storm had caught him off guard, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. His gaze immediately found Sarah, and he paused, confusion flickering across his face before he spoke. "Who's—" Emma stepped forward quickly. "This is Sarah. She had nowhere else to go tonight." Lucas's jaw tightened, but he nodded, understanding immediately. His eyes shifted to Emma, softening. "You shouldn't be out in this storm," he said, his voice low, filled with both worry and relief. Emma stepped aside, letting him in. The warmth of the house hit him instantly, and he pulled off his snow-dusted coat, shaking the cold from his shoulders. His eyes never left Emma's as he took a deep breath. "Thank God. I was worried." Sarah stayed on the couch, watching silently. She had never seen adults act like this before. So worried, so careful, yet so gentle. Something inside her loosened slightly, though she couldn't yet put it into words. Lucas finally turned fully to face them. "Stay here tonight. You'll be safe," he said to Sarah, his tone firm but protective. Then he looked at Emma. "And you should rest. You can't take care of her if you collapse yourself." Emma gave a small, tired smile. "I'll manage." But deep down, she knew she hadn't realized how much she needed him tonight, too. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, burying the world in white. Inside, 4 lives: Emma, Lucas, Sarah, and soon, another who had yet to arrive, were slowly converging, drawn together by the storm, by loss, by grief, and by the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, Christmas could still bring miracles. The storm had become relentless, turning Willow Creek into a blur of white and gray. Snow piled high against fences and cars, the wind rattling rooftops like ghostly hands. Most of the town had settled in, safe behind warm windows. But Michael Walker was still on the road. His van creaked and shuddered over the icy streets as he navigated cautiously, the small Christmas tree ornament dangling from the rearview mirror swaying with each bump. He'd made it through the airport, through the chaotic welcome home ceremonies, but the last stretch of road, the stretch that led him back to the familiar yet forever changed town, was proving treacherous. He kept his eyes on the road, but in the corner of his vision, lights glowed through the storm. The town didn't look the same as when he left. Houses were decorated, smoke curling from chimneys, carols faintly audible through the wind. And yet, it all seemed distant, hollow. Until he saw it. The soft glow of a cottage on Maple Street. A light shining from the living room window, warm and golden. He slowed the van, heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know why the sight struck him so deeply. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was hope. Michael parked and stepped out into the storm. Snow whipped at his face, soaking through his jacket, but he barely noticed. His knees ached from old wounds, every step a reminder of the battles he had survived and those that had left him wounded in ways no one could see. He reached the porch, his hands trembling as he knocked. The door opened. Emma Carter. Her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She had been standing at the window, watching the storm when she saw a figure emerge from the white blur outside. She hadn't expected anyone, not tonight. And yet, here he was. "Michael?" she whispered. He nodded, voice hoarse. "Emma, I'm home."
the words carried a weight neither of them could fully explain. After all these years, after all the loss, after the storm that had raged outside and inside them both, he was finally here. Behind her, Sarah peeked around the corner, curiosity and awe in her wide eyes. She didn't understand all of it, but she felt the shift in the room, the gravity, the warmth, the unspoken relief that someone she didn't know could carry so much, yet still return safely. Lucas's voice came from behind Michael, steady but filled with emotion. "You made it," he said. Hand on Michael's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of friendship, of loyalty, of battles fought together, both visible and invisible. Michael finally let himself breathe. The storm outside was fierce, but inside the cottage, warmth enveloped him. The golden light, the quiet presence of people who cared, and the soft, fragile hope in Sarah's eyes created a cocoon against the raging cold. Emma stepped forward slowly, then closed the door behind him. "Come in," she said softly. Michael's gaze swept across the living room. Sarah sitting cautiously on the couch, Lucas leaning against the doorway, and the Christmas lights casting dancing shadows on the walls. Somehow, in the middle of this small American town and this endless storm, life had not abandoned them. Not completely. Snow piled against the window, wind howled, and the world outside disappeared. But inside, 4 hearts, broken, bruised, and weary, were beginning to beat in sync. And for the first time in a long while, Michael felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years. Home. He reached for Emma's hand, and she let him. In that quiet moment, the storm outside faded into the background. All that mattered was that they were together. The night stretched on. Outside, snow blanketed the town. But inside, laughter, tentative conversation, and the fragile beginnings of healing began to root. Christmas had not yet arrived, but for Willow Creek and for these 4 people bound by fate, grief, and love, it was already beginning.
The storm outside had reached a furious pitch. Snow piled against windows, wind rattled the shutters, and the streets of Willow Creek were completely deserted. Inside Emma's cottage, however, the small space felt impossibly warm. The fireplace crackled, throwing golden light across the room. Snowflakes clung to the window panes like tiny frozen stars, but they seemed distant, powerless, compared to the energy slowly building inside. Sarah sat cross-legged on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket. She stared at the fire as though it were the only anchor in a world that had constantly let her down. Yet for the first time in months, she wasn't alone. She had Emma, who had taken her in without hesitation, Michael, whose quiet strength seemed unshakable, and Lucas, whose protective gaze lingered on all of them, steady and unyielding. Emma poured Kogo into mugs, the chocolate smell mixing with the scent of pine from the small Christmas tree in the corner. Michael sat in an armchair near the fire, his eyes distant, thinking of the battlefield he'd left behind. But now he was here. Now there was warmth and safety, and the faintest sense of hope. Lucas leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the scene. He had saved lives that night at the cabin, but this gentle, fragile moment felt even more vital. Sometimes the battles worth fighting weren't against flames or storms outside, but against the loneliness, grief, and fear inside. Sarah broke the silence first. Her voice was quiet, almost scared. Do you all really think things can get better?" Emma paused, setting down a mug. She sat beside her, placing a hand on hers. She said softly, "Sometimes you don't believe it until you feel it. But little by little, yes, things can get better." Michael's gaze softened, and he spoke for the first time since arriving. "I've seen too much to promise the world, but I can promise. I'm here. I'll stay.
and maybe that's enough for tonight." Sarah looked at him, then at Emma, then at Lucas. The four of them, broken, weary, and hesitant, formed a fragile circle in front of the fire. A sense of unspoken trust began to grow, bridging the distance of years, loss, and mistakes. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the cottage seemed to breathe. The Christmas tree lights flickered, reflecting in their eyes, casting small, hopeful shadows on the walls. It wasn't a perfect Christmas. There were no magical snowfall backdrops, no grand celebrations, but there was warmth, safety, and the small, glowing possibility of healing. Lucas finally stepped forward, picking up a small candle from the mantel. He said simply, "Let's light it." Emma reached for his hand. Michael followed, holding the flame steady. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then carefully placed the candle in the center of the table. The flickering light danced across their faces, illuminating tears, smiles, and the faint glimmer of hope. Outside, the storm raged, relentless and wild. But inside, for the first time in a long time, 4 people felt something extraordinary. They were not alone. And for Willow Creek, in this quiet corner of America, the first miracle of this Christmas began. The storm outside raged like a living thing, shaking the windows and piling snow against the door. Willow Creek had become a ghost town. Roads impossible, power flickering, and the howling wind drowning out almost everything. The small cottage on Maple Street, however, was warm and bright, the fireplace roaring as the 4 of them gathered closer to the hearth. Emma stirred cocoa in mugs, the rich smell mixing with pine and the faint scent of burning wood. She glanced at Sarah, who sat cross-legged on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, shivering even under blankets. Michael moved the fire poker slowly, staring into the flames, lost in memories he hadn't spoken aloud. Lucas leaned against the doorway, eyes scanning the storm outside, as if he could will it to ease. The snow outside had blocked the driveway completely. Emma had tried to clear a path, but it was hopeless. The storm was too strong. They were trapped. Lucas finally broke the silence. "Well, looks like we're staying put tonight," he said, forcing a small smile. Michael nodded, his expression softening. "Could be worse. At least we're safe." Sarah looked around at them, hesitant, still unsure of trust. "So, we're stuck together?" Emma smiled gently. "Yes, for the night." For a moment, none of them spoke. The storm roared, the fire crackled, and outside, the world was swallowed by white. Inside, there was a fragile kind of peace. Michael finally spoke, his voice low, almost unsteady. I haven't felt safe in a long time. Not like this. Not anywhere." Emma's gaze softened. "You're safe now." Lucas added, almost reluctantly, "So are you, Sarah. Nobody's going to let anything happen to you tonight." Sarah looked at them, disbelief in her eyes. Then, quietly she said, I never had anyone say that to me before." Emma reached out and placed her hand on hers. "Then tonight you can believe it." The 4 of them sat in silence, letting the warmth and quiet fill the cracks in their hearts. Michael's eyes traced the contours of the room, landing on the small Christmas tree. He smiled faintly, remembering trees like this from childhood Christmases. For a second, he forgot the horrors he'd seen, the battles he'd fought, the fear that had clung to him for years. Lucas finally moved closer, sitting near the fireplace. "You know," he said, "storms like this, they test you, not just outside, but inside too. But sometimes they bring people together, people who need each other." Emma looked at him, then at Michael, then at Sarah. She realized he was right. The storm outside, the snow, the cold, it had forced them into this moment, into each other's lives. And maybe that was exactly what they needed.
Michael reached for Sarah's hand, hesitating for a moment, before she allowed him to take it. Lucas gave Emma a small, almost imperceptible nod, and she understood it. Strength, protection, care. Outside, the wind screamed and the snow battered the windows. Inside, they huddled together, 4 strangers turned into a small, fragile family. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, each one felt the unspoken promise. Tonight, they were not alone. Tonight, the storm had brought them together. And tomorrow, perhaps Christmas would bring something even greater. The storm had not relented. Outside, Willow Creek was a world of white noise and blinding snow, the wind rattling windows and whipping around the cottage like a furious ghost. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and the small room glowed with soft golden light. For the first time since the storm began, the 4 of them felt a strange stillness, an intimacy born of shared fear, loss, and survival. Sarah sat cross-legged on the rug, the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had been silent for hours, watching Michael and Lucas move around the room with quiet efficiency. Emma preparing cocoa, Lucas stoking the fire, Michael adjusting the blankets to keep her warm. And finally, she spoke. I never had a Christmas like this," she whispered. Her voice trembled, hesitant, unsure if she had permission to speak. I mean, a real one. Emma sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to feel that way," she said softly. "It's okay to want something you've never had." Michael sat in his chair, staring into the flames. The memories came unbidden, snow falling in a war-torn town overseas, letters he had never sent, moments of fear he had buried deep. He exhaled slowly. I didn't think I'd ever be here, back home, feeling normal, feeling safe. I've been so far away from that for so long." Lucas finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I lost someone I shouldn't have, and I've carried that with me every day. Every Christmas, every birthday, I feel like I failed." Emma's heart ached for him. She had lost so much herself. She reached out and took his hand, surprising them both. "We all carry pain," she said, "but it doesn't have to define us. Not tonight, not here." Sarah sat from Emma to Michael to Lucas, her small hands clutching the blanket. I never had anyone care," she whispered. "I was scared and alone, and no one ever told me it would be okay." Michael moved closer, kneeling beside her. "It's okay," he said. "You're not alone anymore. Not tonight, not ever again if we can help it." Lucas added, softly, "We're here, together." For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe it. The fear didn't vanish, but it softened, like snow melting on warm skin. She leaned slightly into Michael, then glanced at Emma and Lucas. They were real, present, a family, not by blood, but by choice, by fate. The firelight flickered across their faces, illuminating tears, smiles, and a fragile sense of hope. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, the cottage was filled with warmth, love, and the beginnings of healing. Emma reached for the small Christmas ornament she had placed on the mantel, a simple glass globe, glitter swirling inside. She held it up. "This is ours tonight. No matter what comes next, we have this moment. And we have each other." Michael and Lucas nodded. Sarah's eyes glistened, and for the first time in years, they all allowed themselves to truly believe in something miraculous, a Christmas that could bring light even in the darkest storm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and white. Inside, 4 hearts, broken, bruised, and weary, were slowly mending, stitched together by hope,
care, and the quiet miracle of being found when they had thought all was lost. The storm had brought them together, and now it was time to let Christmas bring them home. The storm that had swallowed Willow Creek throughout the night began to loosen its grip just before dawn. The wind softened, the snowfall thinned, and for the first time in hours, the world outside Emma's cottage seemed to inhale. A quiet, trembling stillness settled over the town, the kind that comes only after a long and merciless storm. Inside, the fire had dimmed to glowing embers. The room was warm, peaceful, almost sacred. Michael slept sitting upright in the armchair, his head resting back against the cushion, his breathing steady. Sarah slept curled beneath a blanket on the couch, her small hand clutching a corner of it like an anchor. Lucas sat in the corner, keeping watch even though his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. Emma had fallen asleep by the fireplace, her head resting on her folded arms. Lucas stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from his back. The silence in the cottage felt different this morning. Not tense, not frightened. Gentle. Healing. He walked quietly to the window and brushed aside the curtain. Outside, the storm had finally breathed its last. Snow lay thick on the ground, covering the roads, rooftops, and trees in soft white layers. The sky was pale blue, the first hints of daylight brushing against the horizon. Willow Creek looked untouched, pure, like a small world frozen in time. Lucas turned back toward the others, the weight of the previous night settling into perspective. Something had changed between them, something subtle, something important. Pain had been shared, secrets had been spoken, walls had cracked open, and now, in the stillness of morning, the air felt lighter. A soft sound broke the quiet, the faintest whimper. Sarah shifted, her eyes fluttering open. At first she looked confused, as if trying to remember where she was, who she was with, why the world felt different from yesterday. Then she saw Emma sleeping by the fire. She saw Michael in the chair. She saw Lucas watching her. And a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. For a child who had spent so long expecting abandonment, the simple fact that these people were still here in the morning was a miracle. Lucas walked to her and knelt beside the couch. "Hey," he whispered, "you slept through the whole storm." Sarah rubbed her eyes. "It's over?" "Yeah," Lucas said softly. "It's over." Michael stirred then, waking slowly. His hand instinctively reached for the dog tags around his neck as his eyes blinked open. For a brief moment, confusion clouded his face. The same confusion of someone who has spent too long waking in unfamiliar places. But then he saw Emma, Sarah, Lucas, the fire, the cottage, and his expression softened. He was safe. Emma woke last, lifting her head and rubbing her arms. "Is it morning?" she murmured, blinking the sleep away. "Yeah," Lucas said, "and the storm's gone." Emma smiled relieved. The light from the window caught her hair, turning it gold. Michael watched her for a moment, feeling something inside him settle, something he hadn't felt in years. They had survived the worst night Willow Creek had seen in decades, and they had done it together. Sarah sat up slowly. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice fragile. Emma reached for her hand. "Now?" she said gently. "Now we start figuring out what comes next, and until you're ready." Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes shining, not from fear this time, but from something else, something she had never had before. Hope. Lucas moved to the door and opened it. A burst of cold air swept in, crisp and clean. Outside, the world glittered under a blanket of untouched snow. The silence was thick, peaceful, almost holy. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, stepping beside him. Michael joined them, his gaze sweeping across the land he had missed so deeply. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He glanced at Emma. "Christmas isn't here yet, but maybe."
Maybe this is the start of something. She looked up at him, her eyes warm. Maybe it is. Behind them, Sarah slipped off the couch and ran to the doorway, bundled in the blanket like a tiny snow-covered angel. She stared at the bright, snow-covered world with awe. It's like the whole town got a second chance, she whispered. Michael smiled. Maybe we all did. And as the first true light of morning settled over Willow Creek, soft, golden, and full of promise, they stepped together into the snow, 4 souls bound not by blood, but by the storm that had brought them home.
The next morning, the world outside the cabin was buried under a thick quilt of snow, soft and untouched, as if the universe wanted to give them a blank page. But inside, the quiet was heavy, too heavy, like every unspoken word pressed against the walls. Emma sat at the kitchen table, turning a cold mug of cocoa in her hands. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's trembling shoulders, the moment she almost broke apart in front of Jess and Mark. A part of Emma was grateful that Lily had finally opened up, but another part was terrified, because now everything was fragile. Jess entered the kitchen quietly, rubbing her arms for warmth. She stopped when she saw Emma. "You're up early," Jess whispered. Emma nodded. "Couldn't sleep. You?" A weak smile. "Same." For a long moment, neither sister spoke. Their silence wasn't hostile. It was the silence of people who loved each other but didn't know how to carry the same pain. Finally, Jess sat across from her. "What we learned last night, it changes things." "It changes everything," Emma corrected softly. Jess lowered her head. "Lily's been carrying that kind of grief alone in another country for months, and we didn't even notice." Emma's eyes filled. "We were hurt too. We were grieving too, but I feel like we failed her." Jess reached out, squeezing her hand. "No, we're here now. That's what matters." Emma wanted to believe that, but she couldn't shake the guilt. Lily had always been the bright one, sunshine in human form. If someone like that could shatter, it meant Emma didn't understand the world as well as she thought she did. The door opened gently, and Mark walked in. He looked exhausted. "She's awake," he said softly, "but she's quiet." Emma felt her stomach sink. "What do you mean, quiet?" Mark hesitated. "Like she's afraid to speak. Like she thinks she doesn't deserve to take up space." Jess stood immediately, tears already threatening. "She's never been like that." "I know, and that scares me." They went upstairs together. Lily was sitting on the floor by the window, her knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a blanket like she was trying to hide from the world. Morning light spilled over her in broken pieces. Emma approached slowly. "Lily? Hey." Lily didn't turn. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jess's voice cracked. "For what?" "For ruining last night, for being a mess, for everything." Her voice shook badly. "You guys have your lives together. You're strong. You're moving forward. And I'm the only one who keeps falling apart." Emma sank to her knees in front of her. "Lily, look at me." Lily lifted her eyes, and Emma froze, because her sister's eyes didn't just look sad, they looked empty, like someone who ran out of hope. Emma said firmly, "You're not ruining anything. Last night wasn't you breaking everything, it was you finally letting us in." Jess knelt beside her. "You don't have to be strong every second. You're allowed to fall apart. That's why you have us." Lily shook her head. "But what if I'm too broken for you to fix?" Mark stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Then we learn how to hold the pieces with you. That's what family is. And that was the moment Lily finally cried again. Silent, painful sobs that shook her whole body. Emma and Jess wrapped their arms around her, holding her so tightly that none of the cold December air could touch her. For the first time in months, Lily didn't feel alone. For the first time in months, her grief had a place to land. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke into her hair. "We're not going anywhere. Not this Christmas, not ever." Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. Slow, soft, peaceful. Inside, something fragile began to mend. Not fully, not magically, but enough. Enough for Lily to breathe without breaking. Enough for the three sisters to feel, for the first time in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, the weight of December didn't have to crush them. They just had to carry it together. The day unfolded slowly, wrapped in silence and the pale glow of winter light. The cabin felt different now, not heavy but fragile, like one loud breath could crack the air in half. Lily stayed curled on the couch downstairs, wrapped in a thick blanket Mark had placed around her shoulders. She wasn't crying anymore, but her eyes had that distant, glassy look, as if she was still replaying every moment she'd tried to bury. Jess moved quietly around the kitchen, pretending to clean, but her hands were shaking. Emma watched her from the doorway, sensing the storm brewing inside her sister. Jess was strong. She always had been, but even strength had a breaking point. "Jess," Emma said gently. Jess froze. Her shoulders stiffened. "I'm fine." "You're not," Emma replied softly. Jess slammed the dish towel into the counter. Her breath hitched and she looked away quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the tears welling up. "She almost gave up. Our little sister. She almost didn't make it through the grief." Emma stepped forward, placing a hand on her back. "Jess, we didn't know. She hid it from us." Jess shook her head, tears finally slipping free. "I should have seen it. I'm her older sister. I was supposed to protect her. When Mom and Dad died, I promised myself I'd take care of both of you." Emma pulled her into a hug. "You did. You still are. But you can't carry all the guilt for something you couldn't control." Jess's voice cracked. "Then why does it feel like I failed her?" "Because you love her, and love makes us blame ourselves for things that aren't our fault." Jess broke, not loudly. Jess never fell apart loudly, but quietly, like a dam silently giving way. Emma held her until her shaking eased. Little did they know that Lily had heard every word. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't unaware. She was listening from the couch, the blanket pulled tight around her as tears gathered in her eyes. She never wanted her pain to become theirs. Mark came over, kneeling beside her. "You heard them, didn't you?" Lily nodded without lifting her face. Mark gently touched her shoulder. "You're not a burden." She swallowed hard. "I never wanted them to feel like they failed me. They didn't." "But grief makes everyone feel like they're not enough," Mark said softly. "That's why we have to talk. That's why we have to lean on each other." Lily wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I don't know how to stop feeling like I'm broken." Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we'll learn together." She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, and for the first time since coming back home, Lily let someone see her fear without hiding it. "Mark, what if I never feel like myself again?" "You will. Not today, not tomorrow, but slowly, and we'll be there for every step." The door creaked behind them as Jess and Emma entered. Their eyes were red, but there was something fierce in their expressions. Emma walked over and knelt beside Lily. "We're in this together." Jess sat on Lily's other side, wiping her cheeks. Every breath, every step, every painful day, we're not letting you go through this alone. Lily's lips trembled. I don't deserve you guys. Jess shook her head. No, you deserve more than what the world gave you. Lily squeezed both their hands, and for a brief moment, everything felt warm, like the cabin itself exhaled in relief. The three sisters leaned against each other, forming the kind of circle that grief can't break. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Snowflakes crashed violently against the glass as a heavy winter storm rolled in, fast, dark, and merciless. Mark glanced outside. Weather app says the storm's going to hit hard tonight. We might lose power. Jess sighed. Perfect timing. But Emma wasn't afraid, because for the first time in a long time, they weren't breaking apart. They were holding on. Together. The storm outside didn't scare them. It was the storm inside that they were learning to survive. Slowly, painfully, but together. And that made all the difference.
The storm hit harder than anyone expected. By evening, the wind roared like a living thing, hammering against the cabin walls as if trying to break in. Snow swirled outside in thick, frantic waves, erasing every shape, every path, every familiar point of the world. Inside, the lights flickered. Then everything went dark. Lily felt her heart stutter. Darkness had been her enemy for months. Too many quiet nights in her apartment overseas, drowning in memories she couldn't escape. Too many hours feeling the weight of a world that kept spinning without the people she loved. Jess immediately grabbed a flashlight. Okay, we'll be fine. This happens every winter. Emma lit a candle. Its warm glow flickered across the room, softening the edges of the fear that tried to creep in. Mark tossed another blanket over Lily's shoulders. We're safe. That's all that matters. For a moment, silence settled. Not the heavy silence of grief, but the quiet of a family preparing to face something together. Lily pulled her knees up. Can we sit by the fireplace? Jess nodded, helping her up. Of course. They gathered around the small fireplace, the only source of steady warmth. The crackling flames cast a golden light that danced across their faces. Emma looked at her sisters. Do you remember when Mom used to sit us by the fire on Christmas Eve? She'd make hot cocoa and tell us stories about when she was little. Jess laughed softly. She'd burn half the marshmallows. On purpose, Lily whispered, her voice shaking. She said burnt marshmallows tasted like courage. Jess smiled through a tear. She did. For a long moment, the three sisters stared into the fire. The storm outside howled. The storm inside softened. Lily's eyes glistened. I thought when they died, that Christmas died too, that everything good in me died with them. Emma shifted closer. Christmas didn't die, Lily. It just changed shape. Jess added, it became us. We're what's left of them. Lily swallowed, her voice cracking. I was so scared to come home. I didn't want you to see how broken I'd become. Emma touched her cheek, brushing a tear away. Being broken doesn't make you unlovable. Jess held Lily's trembling hand. It makes you human. Lily let out a breath, a long, painful breath she'd been holding for months. I just wanted the pain to stop. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Mark spoke from behind them, his voice gentle. You belong right here. Another gust of wind slammed against the house, but Lily didn't flinch this time. She looked at her sisters, really looked, and something warm filled her chest. Not joy, not yet, but something like the promise of joy, something like the beginning of hope. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in soft fabric. She wasn't going to give this until tomorrow, she said quietly, but now feels right. She handed the bundle to Lily. With shaking hands, Lily unwrapped it. It was a photo frame. Inside was a picture of the three sisters as kids, standing in front of their old Christmas tree, messy hair, pajamas, missing teeth, smiling with the kind of happiness that had no fear in it. Under the photo, engraved in silver, were the words, "We are still us." Lily's breath broke. Tears streamed down her face, not the silent, wounded tears she'd cried before, but heavy, releasing, healing tears. Jess wrapped her arms around her. Emma leaned in, holding both of them tightly. Mark placed a hand on all three of their shoulders, grounding them. In the flickering glow of the fire, surrounded by the crackle of wood and the distant roar of the storm, Lily finally let go. She cried for their parents. She cried for the loneliness she endured. She cried for the months she felt invisible. She cried for the girl she used to be and the woman she was becoming. When her tears finally slowed, Lily whispered, "I'm not okay yet, but I want to try. I want to live again." Emma kissed her forehead. "We'll help you." Jess rested her head against Lily's. "Every step." Mark smiled softly. "Every Christmas." Outside, the storm began to ease. The wind quieted, the snow softened from violent flurries to gentle flakes. And then, the power flickered back on. The Christmas lights Emma had hung earlier blinked to life, warm and colorful, filling the cabin with a soft glow that made the whole room shimmer. Lily stared at them, her breath catching. For the first time since she lost everything, Christmas felt possible. Not perfect, not painless, but possible. She leaned against her sisters, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Emma squeezed her. "Never." Jess nodded. "Not in this lifetime." Outside, the world was covered in a blanket of fresh white. Inside, something long frozen finally began to thaw. Together, they watched the Christmas light shimmer in the dark, a small, steady reminder that even in the coldest winter, light can find its way back home, and so could they.